Hello everyone, I'm Nathan Cole, and this is Fatal Files. Today, I'm going over some of the worst and most brutal Grand Canyon deaths ever recorded. From a man filming himself walking backward in flip-flops near a canyon edge, to an influencer whose desperate need for a perfect critter selfie ended with her name added to the canyon's growing list of fatalities. It was May 6, 2018, near Hermit Trailhead, where temperatures reached 91 degrees despite posted heat advisories. The group continued along exposed, rocky trails under still desert air as afternoon heat intensified across the canyon walls. Vaughn Trite, a 37-year-old delivery driver from Flagstaff, had joined two co-workers for an afternoon hike along one of the lesser-used trails in the area. Known for his brash personality and tendency to show off for social media, Vaughn constantly documented his outdoor adventures with photos and videos. His colleagues had grown accustomed to his attention-seeking behavior, though they often expressed concern about his willingness to take unnecessary risks. After hiking for approximately 2 hours, they encountered a western diamondback rattlesnake coiled beside sandstone rocks near the trail. The 4-foot snake had positioned itself in the shade between the boulders, seeking relief from the intense heat. Its distinctive diamond-patterned markings were clearly visible, identifying it as one of the region's most medically significant species. Vaughn immediately pulled out his phone and began filming from about 8 feet away. The reptile remained motionless in its defensive coil, displaying typical defensive behavior. His companions urged him to maintain distance and continue along the trail, recognizing the inherent danger. Ignoring their warnings, Vaughn stepped closer, reducing the distance to approximately 5 feet while continuing to record. He retrieved a lightweight aluminum trekking pole from his backpack and began prodding the rocks near the snake's position, attempting to provoke movement for more dramatic footage. The snake's rattle buzzed in warning, but the continued harassment triggered its natural strike response. Vaughn had positioned himself directly in front of the reptile, well within strike range, which typically extends to approximately 2/3 of the snake's body length. The rattlesnake struck with lightning speed, its fangs penetrating Vaughn's lower left leg just above the ankle, delivering a significant dose of hemotoxic venom directly into his tissue and bloodstream. As Vaughn jerked backward in shock and pain, a second defensive strike hit his right calf. Both strikes resulted in confirmed envenomation, compounding the venom load in a body already compromised by dehydration and exertion in extreme heat. Severe pain radiated from both bite sites, followed by rapid swelling and visible discoloration that spread within minutes. Blood oozed from the puncture wounds as the venom began breaking down blood cells and tissue, while also affecting his cardiovascular system. Vaughn's companions immediately called emergency services using their cell phones, providing GPS coordinates from their hiking app. They attempted to keep him calm and still, knowing an increased heart rate would accelerate venom circulation through his bloodstream. Within 20 minutes of the bites, Vaughn developed severe pain, rapidly expanding swelling around both legs, dizziness, nausea, and early signs of circulatory instability. Became increasingly disoriented as the venom spread through his bloodstream. Tissue damage was visible at both bite sites, with rapidly expanding swelling and deepening discoloration spreading outward. Emergency services dispatched a helicopter from Flagstaff Medical Center, but the remote location delayed their arrival. The helicopter reached the scene approximately 35 minutes after the initial call, landing in a cleared area about 200 yards from the bite location. Paramedics found Vaughn unconscious with severe swelling in both legs and obvious signs of systemic envenomation. Despite immediate stabilization and rapid transport, his condition continued to deteriorate. At the hospital, he was given anti-venom and intensive supportive care, but developed uncontrollable internal bleeding and cardiovascular collapse. He was pronounced dead several hours after arrival at the medical facility. The official cause of death was cardiovascular collapse secondary to severe hemotoxic envenomation and hypovolemic shock. The subsequent investigation revealed the victim had deliberately provoked the snake while filming, directly contributing to the fatal encounter. It was June 18, 2017, near Lava Falls Rapid, on the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. Spring snowmelt had pushed water levels high, turning the Class 5 rapid fast and unpredictable. Powerful waves and violent hydraulics churned through the narrow channel. 27-year-old Connor Reed had joined a commercial rafting expedition with a small group of friends eager to tackle the challenging rapids. A recent college graduate working in entry-level office positions, Connor was physically fit but had limited experience with serious whitewater. He was known among his friends as someone who sought excitement and often pushed boundaries to capture memorable experiences for social media. The guided trip included a mix of novice and experienced rafters, with professional guides stationed at both ends of the main raft and in accompanying safety rafts. Before entering the rapid, the guides had conducted detailed safety briefings about proper positioning, the importance of maintaining secure handholds, and the specific dangers posed by Class 5 rapids. They emphasized that passengers should remain seated and keep both hands on safety ropes. Connor positioned himself at the very front of the raft, a location identified during the safety briefing as higher risk. He carried a camera rig that included a small tripod strapped to his chest for hands-free filming, along with a waterproof backpack. The guides had specifically instructed all passengers to secure loose gear and maintain proper grip on safety lines. As the raft approached lava falls, the guides shouted final instructions over the roar of the churning water. The rapid ahead featured massive standing waves, followed by a dangerous hydraulic at the base, where water dropped over a ledge and circulated back upstream. This hydraulic was capable of trapping and repeatedly tumbling anything that fell into its circulation pattern. Connor leaned forward over the bow to film the approaching rapid, extending his camera to capture the dramatic footage he wanted. In his excitement to document the experience, he failed to maintain his grip on the safety ropes as instructed. The camera rig strapped to his chest and the backpack created additional bulk that affected his balance. The raft hit the first major wave with tremendous force, launching a wall of water over the bow. The impact threw Connor off balance, and without secure handholds, he was unable to brace against the violent motion. He tumbled forward over the front of the raft and into the churning water just as the raft entered the most dangerous section. The powerful current immediately swept Connor toward the hydraulic at the base of the rapid. His life vest kept him buoyant, but the straps from his camera equipment and backpack complicated his movement as he was pulled underwater by the circulating current. The hydraulic's recirculating flow repeatedly pushed him down and tumbled him underwater, preventing him from reaching the surface. Guides in the main raft and accompanying safety rafts immediately initiated rescue procedures, but the violent water conditions and Connor's position in the hydraulic made immediate extraction extremely difficult. The safety rafts had to navigate carefully to avoid being caught in the same hydraulic. After several minutes of being repeatedly cycled through the hydraulic circulation pattern, Connor's struggles became less coordinated. The combination of exhaustion from fighting the current, repeated submersion, and restricted movement caused his struggles to become increasingly weak and uncoordinated. Rescue teams finally managed to extract Connor from the hydraulic and pull him into a safety raft approximately 6 minutes after he had initially fallen overboard. Despite immediate attempts at resuscitation, he was unresponsive and showed no signs of breathing. Emergency medical personnel were contacted via satellite communication, but the remote location required helicopter evacuation. Connor was later pronounced dead. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was drowning due to prolonged submersion and exhaustion in the hydraulic circulation pattern. The official investigation documented the incident as an accidental drowning caused by failure to follow safety instructions and improper positioning in the raft. Investigators noted that the victim's camera equipment had become entangled during his time in the water, contributing to his inability to surface effectively. It was April 10, 2015. Sunrise lit the stone around Desert View Watchtower on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. Wind moved steadily across the exposed rim, lifting dust and pushing at clothing. Visitors stayed near the railings, but open rock shelves beyond them remained accessible. That was where Noah Patel, 25 and a yoga instructor from San Diego, decided the background would look strongest. Noah taught vinyasa classes near Ocean Beach and relied on social media to fill workshops. His page featured handstands on beaches, rooftops, and boulders. He marketed the poses as proof of control in any environment. The more dramatic the backdrop, the more engagement he received. His balance training came from indoor studios with flat floors and climate control. He had no climbing background and no experience assessing fall exposure. The Grand Canyon rim is primarily limestone that breaks down into loose grit and pebble-sized fragments. Spring winds regularly gust above 20 miles per hour along exposed sections, accelerating unpredictably over the edge. National Weather Service data that morning recorded sustained winds near 18 miles per hour, with gusts reaching 25 to 30 miles per hour along exposed rim areas. Rangers advised visitors to stay clear of the edges due to the conditions. Noah stepped beyond a low stone barrier east of the watchtower onto a closed, unprotected rock shelf where the terrain dropped sharply into ledges and talus. Instead of setting up well back from the edge, he repositioned several times to bring the canyon fully into frame behind him. He placed his tripod about 5 to 6 feet from the rim, but then walked forward until his hands would be less than 2 feet from the drop. The shot required the illusion that he was suspended directly over open space. The ground surface consisted of compacted limestone with a thin layer of loose sand and scattered gravel. Witnesses later said he used his shoe to push aside several small stones, but did not test the stability of the surface under full body weight. He checked the camera preview, adjusted framing again, and stepped into position. He bent forward and planted both palms near the edge. Without pausing to reset footing or reassess wind, he kicked upward into a handstand. The tripod recording shows an initial vertical alignment that lasted approximately 4 seconds. His legs were straight and together, toes pointed toward the sky. A gust struck from his left. His hips shifted off center. Instead of coming down safely, he attempted to fight the wind and hold the pose. He pressed harder through his fingertips, increasing the downward force through his right palm. The loose grit beneath that hand began to slide toward the rim. The footage shows his right hand shifting roughly 2 inches. His shoulders trembled as he tried to restack his body over unstable contact points. Another gust hit. His legs separated slightly in an attempt to counterbalance. His right elbow bent under load. Gravel displaced again. For about 3 seconds, he attempted to recover rather than exit the pose. His left palm then slipped on fine sand. With both hands compromised and his center of mass beyond his base of support, his torso rotated sideways. His lower body cleared the rim first. The tripod captured his body tilting out of frame. Nearby visitors heard a brief cry that ended abruptly. He fell approximately 130 feet, striking a slanted rock ledge before sliding into a steep slope of broken stone. A visitor dialed 911 within a minute. Local rangers arrived at the rim in 8 minutes, located him with binoculars, and a technical rescue team was later mobilized to establish anchors and descend by rope. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death blunt force trauma from a high fall, with a severe skull fracture, traumatic brain injury, upper cervical spine damage, and multiple rib and internal organ injuries consistent with high-velocity impact. The injuries were unsurvivable. The tripod remained upright and captured the full sequence, later collected as evidence and used in safety briefings on wind exposure and unstable rim surfaces. The death was ruled accidental, with park officials emphasizing that stepping beyond guardrails and performing balance stunts near exposed edges creates extreme fall risk during gusting conditions. It was September 3, 2015, at Horseshoe Bend near Page, Arizona. The overlook was quiet in the early morning light. At the time, no guardrails lined the area, and warning signs along the approach advised visitors to remain near the main overlook at the end of the trail and away from unstable edges. The drop to the Colorado River below measured nearly 1,000 feet, and the sandstone rim appeared solid from above, despite its fragile layers. Aaliyah Brooks, 25, had driven in from Flagstaff before sunrise. She worked part-time at a budget motel and often chose isolated spots during hikes, preferring areas that felt less restricted than designated viewpoints. Friends said she sometimes ignored marked boundaries if she believed the safer areas were too crowded or controlled. She wore running shoes with flat soles and carried a small day pack with water and snacks, prioritizing comfort and mobility over traction or support along uneven ground. She reached the overlook around 7:10 a.m. Conditions were calm and visibility clear, but several small groups had already gathered along the main viewing area. Rather than wait for space to open near the main overlook at the end of the trail, Aaliyah continued past the posted viewing section, looking for a place where she could sit directly on the rim without barriers or other visitors nearby. Witnesses later told investigators she appeared frustrated by the crowded overlook, pacing briefly before moving farther along the edge despite warning signs marking the safer boundary. About 20 minutes later, she stepped beyond a cluster of signs and onto an unmaintained stretch of sandstone. From above, the surface looked flat and continuous, but the rock consisted of thin Navajo sandstone layers that naturally separated over time. Two visitors nearby noticed her scanning the edge as if searching for a place to rest. One person suggested she stay closer to the main overlook. Aaliyah gave a short, dismissive wave and continued forward. She selected a narrow rock lip that extended slightly past the main rim. The section formed a subtle overhang with little visible support beneath it. At approximately 7:36 a.m., she stepped onto the protruding area and lowered herself into a seated position facing outward toward the river. Witnesses said she shifted her weight once, leaning back slightly with her hands braced behind her. Seconds later, the sandstone fractured along a natural seam. The outer portion failed abruptly under her static weight. A sharp crack echoed across the rim as the slab separated inward toward the edge and dropped away. Witnesses described seeing her disappear almost instantly as the broken rock fell with her. Because the cliff face angled outward at that point, there were few opportunities for her body to make contact with the wall during the fall. She dropped nearly straight down toward the talus slope and boulder field below. Emergency services were notified at approximately 7:39 a.m. Due to steep terrain and limited access, both ground and air teams required several hours to reach the base of the canyon. Aaliyah was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner documented extensive blunt force trauma consistent with a fall from extreme height, including catastrophic head injuries, multiple long bone fractures, pelvic instability, and massive internal bleeding. Findings indicated death occurred at impact, and the manner of death was ruled accidental. Investigators later examined the failure point along the rim. The broken slab revealed a thin sandstone layer typical of overhanging formations in the area, not designed to support body weight. Rangers reiterated guidance for visitors to remain near the main overlook area and avoid stepping onto protruding rim edges, noting that the hazard itself had long existed. But the decision to move beyond marked boundaries created the fatal risk. It was May 14, 2017, along the South Kaibab Trail inside Grand Canyon National Park in northern Arizona, where late spring temperatures had already begun climbing across the canyon and the exposed ridge trail received direct sunlight for most of the day as visitors moved steadily along the route, descending from the rim toward the scenic viewpoints carved into the canyon wall. Gray Ploft, a 29-year-old who worked rotating night shifts at a large storage facility, had stopped at the canyon during a road trip through Arizona with two friends. Gray had recently begun recording short travel clips during weekend drives and posting them online. Friends described him as energetic and impulsive, often eager to film quick adventure moments, frequently without considering basic safety precautions. The group arrived at the canyon after seeing photos of the South Kaibab Trail viewpoints circulating online earlier that week. Despite visible warning signs at the trailhead specifically advising proper hiking footwear, Gray stepped onto the trail wearing athletic shorts, a sleeveless shirt, and thin rubber flip-flops purchased at a gas station the previous night. The sandals had flexible foam soles and a narrow strap between the toes, the kind of footwear explicitly warned against in park brochures. Several hikers near the trail entrance noticed the footwear and commented casually as Gray passed, with at least two people directly mentioning that flip-flops were a poor choice for the rocky terrain. Gray dismissed the concerns with a wave. In one hand, he carried a small filming stick with a phone attached. In the other, he held a single 16-ounce bottle of water, far below what rangers typically recommend for hiking in the canyon. The group began descending the trail together, occasionally stopping where the canyon opened into wider views. About 0.8 of a mile down the trail, the path angled along a more exposed stretch where loose gravel had collected across the dusty surface. The narrow trail dropped quickly along the canyon wall, and in several places, the outer edge sloped toward steep talus fields that fell away toward lower ledges. As Gray walked, the thin foam soles of his flip-flops repeatedly bent against the uneven ground. Hikers behind him later reported seeing him adjust his balance several times while stepping over gravel patches, stumbling noticeably yet continuing downward without reconsidering his footwear. At one point, Gray turned around and began walking backward while holding the phone out in front of him to capture the canyon rising behind the trail, focusing on the phone screen rather than the trail beneath his feet. The path in that section tilted slightly toward the outer edge where small stones had accumulated. While stepping backward with his eyes fixed on the phone screen, the foam sole of his right flip-flop folded sideways under his foot. His heel slid off the sandal as his weight shifted onto loose gravel. Witnesses reported seeing his foot skid outward as the sandal twisted beneath him. Gray attempted to catch his balance, but his footing gave way near the edge of the trail, the flip-flop offering no grip on the unstable surface. His body slid off the narrow path and onto the steep slope beside it. The loose rocks immediately below shifted under his weight, and he began tumbling down the talus incline. Hikers nearby heard several impacts as he struck rock ledges during the fall. His body traveled roughly 40 to 60 feet before coming to rest on a rocky shelf between two outcroppings. People standing along the trail looked down and saw him lying motionless several ledges below. Two hikers moved up the trail to report the fall, while others remained at the edge to keep sight of his location. After hikers reported the fall at the trailhead, park rangers later arrived and carefully descended the slope toward the ledge where he had come to rest. When they reached the ledge, they confirmed Gray had suffered fatal blunt force trauma consistent with multiple impacts during the fall. Investigators examined the section of trail where witnesses reported the slip occurred. A broken flip-flop was found several feet above the edge along the gravel-covered portion of the path. The foam sole had bent sharply near the strap, consistent with the sandal folding under pressure. It was June 27, 2016, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the south rim of the Grand Canyon. The temperature hovered around 85 degrees, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of juniper and pine across the rocky terrain. Tourists moved along the well-worn paths, cameras clicking as they captured the vast expanse of layered rock formations stretching toward the horizon. Dixie Gable, a 41-year-old administrative assistant from Phoenix, had driven up with 3 co-workers for a day trip. Known for her infectious laugh and tendency to document every moment of her adventures, Dixie had already filled her phone with dozens of photos since arriving that morning. She wore comfortable walking sandals and a bright blue tank top, her shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. The group had spent most of the day following the main rim trail, but as the afternoon wore on, they ventured toward a quieter plateau overlook, set back about 30 feet from the main canyon edge. The area featured scattered sandstone slabs and weathered boulders, creating natural seating areas where visitors could rest and take in the panoramic views without the crowds. Dixie spotted what she considered the perfect backdrop, a clear view of the canyon's layered walls with the Colorado River visible as a thin ribbon far below. She handed her water bottle to one of her companions and pulled out her phone, stepping backward to frame the shot properly. The plateau's surface was uneven, with loose sandstone fragments and small rocks scattered across the weathered bedrock. Her co-workers noticed the unstable footing and called out warnings about the rocky terrain. The area had several fractured sandstone slabs that appeared solid, but rested loosely on the underlying rock surface. Dixie continued adjusting her position, focused on getting the canyon's dramatic depth in the background of her selfie. The late afternoon lighting created perfect conditions for photography, with golden hour approaching and shadows adding dramatic contrast to the canyon walls. As she took another step backward, her left foot landed on what appeared to be a stable sandstone slab about 2 feet wide. The loose rock shifted suddenly under her weight, throwing off her balance. She stumbled, trying to regain her footing, but her right foot caught the edge of a small boulder embedded in the plateau surface. The combination of the tilting slab and the obstacle sent her tumbling forward. She fell approximately 15 feet down a steep rocky slope below the plateau. Her head struck a sharp sandstone outcropping with devastating force during the initial impact, followed by her body hitting several more jagged rock formations on the way down. The trauma to her head and torso was catastrophic. Her companions immediately called for help using the emergency number posted at nearby trail markers. Park rangers responded from the South Rim station, reaching the scene in approximately 12 minutes. They found Dixie unresponsive at the bottom of the rocky slope, her phone lying shattered several feet away. Despite immediate medical attention, Dixie was pronounced dead at the scene. The subsequent investigation determined that the official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and torso sustained during the fall, with the fatal injury occurring when her head struck a sandstone outcropping below the overlook. Rangers concluded that she had been attempting to take a photograph while walking backward across unstable terrain, which directly led to the loss of balance. The incident report cited loose, fractured sandstone, scattered rocks, and uneven footing as contributing factors, along with her footwear choice. Park officials later referenced the case in internal safety briefings, reinforcing long-standing guidelines, warning visitors to remain stationary and alert when taking photographs near canyon edges and rocky plateau overlook. It was July 3, 2017, at Desert View Campground on the eastern rim of the Grand Canyon. Nighttime temperatures hovered around 75 degrees Fahrenheit as a light breeze moved through juniper and sagebrush. Campfire smoke drifted across the campsites under a clear, star-filled Arizona sky. Hardy Vorn, 41, had set up his campsite near a shallow rocky wash along the eastern edge of Desert View Campground. A self-employed handyman from Phoenix, he placed greater trust in practical experience than formal safety advice. Family members later stated that he had complained of intermittent breathing problems in the past, but had never sought medical evaluation. Friends and co-workers described him as someone who routinely dismissed posted warnings. He had traveled to the canyon with his 9-year-old son for a long holiday weekend, planning to sightsee the following morning. Throughout the campground, notices warned visitors about venomous desert wildlife, including Arizona bark scorpions, which are most active after dark. Rangers routinely reminded campers to wear closed-toe shoes at night and to avoid handling firewood, rocks, or equipment without checking underneath. Bark scorpions commonly shelter beneath bark and debris during the day, emerging after sunset as temperatures drop. As evening progressed, Hardy decided to gather additional firewood from the nearby wash. Without gloves, he moved fallen branches and lifted pieces of deadwood scattered among the rocks. His son remained at the picnic table nearby, watching as Hardy sorted through bark-covered logs illuminated by lantern light. When Hardy lifted a section of loose bark, a small, pale yellow scorpion dropped onto the sandy ground below. Witnesses later stated that he drew attention to it and dismissed the posted warnings, treating the animal as harmless despite signage throughout the campground. To demonstrate his point, Hardy crouched down and extended his bare hand toward the scorpion. The animal attempted to move away, but Hardy persisted, positioning his palm in its path. After several seconds, the scorpion crawled onto his hand. For nearly a minute, Hardy held the scorpion in his hand, maintaining control of it despite visible signs of distress from the animal. Without further provocation, the scorpion struck. Its stinger pierced the skin of Hardy's index finger, injecting venom directly into the tissue. Hardy immediately shook his hand and dropped the animal, dismissing the sting as minor. But within minutes, intense pain radiated up his arm. His fingers began to cramp, followed by uncontrollable muscle spasms that spread through his forearm and shoulder. Medical examiners later noted that the venom caused severe neurological disruption consistent with bark scorpion envenomation. His facial muscles twitched erratically, his eyes darted involuntarily, and his limbs jerked in sharp, uncoordinated movements. Campers nearby noticed that he had become extremely sensitive to touch, recoiling even as others tried to steady him. Excessive saliva began pooling in his mouth as the muscles controlling his jaw and throat spasmed unpredictably. Hardy struggled to clear his airway or speak clearly. His breathing became irregular as he lost control of the muscles needed to protect it. Within minutes, he became disoriented and collapsed to the ground, gasping as his breathing became increasingly ineffective. Nearby campers immediately contacted emergency services and moved Hardy's son away from the scene. Park rangers arrived approximately 35 minutes later, delayed by limited nighttime access and distance from the nearest staffed ranger station. Emergency medical personnel followed after additional coordination. Despite attempts to stabilize him, Hardy was unresponsive upon their arrival. The official investigation later determined that Hardy died from respiratory failure caused by neurotoxic scorpion envenomation, compounded by an undiagnosed respiratory condition and delayed emergency treatment. Medical examiners noted that while Arizona bark scorpion stings are rarely fatal in healthy adults, intentionally handling the animal delayed effective intervention and increased the risk of severe neurological complications. The campground reopened later that night following routine documentation. Investigators concluded that the outcome would likely have been avoided if the animal had not been intentionally handled and emergency care had been reached sooner. It was September 3, 2014. Yavapai Point on the south rim of the Grand Canyon lay under a full moon, open to visitors at all hours. The stone overlooked quiet, except for wind rising from the canyon. Beyond the railing, the land dropped several hundred feet to sloped rock and broken talus below. Marcus Bell was 35, a retail store manager from Phoenix. His job was routine: closing registers, locking cases, turning off lights. Over time, he began consuming extreme sports videos and telling coworkers that the athletes were not exceptional, just willing to ignore rules others feared. He had never skydived, never taken canopy training, never exited an aircraft. 2 weeks before the trip, he bought a used base rig from an online seller who described it as ready to jump. The exchange took place in a grocery store parking lot. Marcus paid cash and left without asking about canopy age, line condition, or prior jumps. At home, he practiced putting on the harness while watching short tutorials. He never completed a supervised line check, never performed a proper hanging harness test, and never deployed the canopy in a controlled setting. He repacked it repeatedly on his apartment floor, assuming neat folding equaled competence. Base jumping requires training in exit force, body position, canopy heading control, and emergency procedures. Yavapai Point is underhung, meaning the cliff curves inward below the rim. Jumpers must push aggressively outward to clear the wall. Marcus did not account for that detail. He told his friend Tyler that gravity would carry him far enough. Because base jumping is illegal in Grand Canyon National Park, he chose 3 a.m. to avoid rangers. He parked in a public lot, concealed the rig in a gym bag, and climbed over the barrier at 3:12 a.m. Tyler stood about 50 feet back with a handheld thermal camera to record. Marcus took no running start. The thermal footage shows him stepping forward casually. His heat signature drops almost straight down with minimal outward projection. Instead of clearing the wall, he fell along the inward curving limestone. Within seconds, he deployed the pilot chute too close to the rock. Base canopies inflate rapidly at low altitude. On thermal footage, a bright bloom expands as the canopy opens directly against the cliff. The nylon scraped across limestone and briefly snagged on a protruding edge. Marcus swung forward and struck the wall chest first. Investigators later documented scuff marks and canopy fibers at that location. Under uneven load and misalignment, the canopy tore. The lines twisted. The fabric failed. The thermal image shows his heat signature separating from the canopy and accelerating downward. He fell several hundred feet onto talus rock below. The footage captures a rapid descent, followed by stillness at impact. Tyler stepped back from the rim and called 911 at 3:16 a.m. Rangers arrived within 20 minutes, but delayed descent until daylight due to terrain risk. At 7:40 a.m., Marcus was located on broken rock near the base of the wall. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death massive blunt force trauma. The fall shattered his pelvis and spine, fractured multiple ribs, and caused a catastrophic skull fracture with severe brain injury. The injuries were consistent with immediate loss of consciousness and rapid death on impact. Inspection of the rig revealed uneven line stows, improper bridle routing, and inconsistent packing. No manufacturing defect was found. Investigators concluded the fatal sequence resulted from an illegal jump, no formal training, improper canopy packing, failure to account for the underhung wall, and minimal exit force. The thermal footage was logged as evidence and briefly circulated online before being removed. Park officials later referenced the case in enforcement briefings, emphasizing that unauthorized jumps by untrained individuals repeatedly produce similar outcomes. Marcus's death was ruled accidental. The decisions leading to it were intentional. It was July 14, 2016, at Grand Canyon West, Arizona. The West Rim landing pad stretched across flat mesa rock beneath a wide, cloudless sky and dry desert heat. By 5:48 p.m., the sun had dropped low, pulling long shadows across the ground as a tour helicopter settled onto the pad, its engine still running and rotors turning. One of the visitors was Carla Nguyen, 34, a dental office administrator from Tempe. She ran a small travel photography blog with a modest following and had saved for months to book the helicopter tour. During the flight, she focused heavily on capturing angles through the window, carrying 2 cameras and reviewing shots frequently. Like the other passengers, she had listened to the safety briefing and read the card in front of her seat, instructions that emphasized staying forward and away from the rear of the aircraft after landing. The aircraft was a light tour helicopter with a conventional exposed tail rotor mounted at the rear. At ground idle, even with power reduced, both the main rotor above and the tail rotor behind continue spinning at high speed. The tail rotor disc, about 3 feet across, can appear almost invisible in direct sunlight. Its sound blends with engine noise and wind. The danger area behind the aircraft was marked by a low guide rope and explained clearly in the pre-landing briefing. Before anyone exited, the pilot repeated the standard instructions: stay low, move forward and to the left, remain inside the rope, do not cross behind the aircraft. 5 passengers followed those directions without hesitation. Carla stepped out last and initially walked toward the front as instructed. She paused to review an image on her camera screen while the helicopter remained at ground idle. The low sun settled directly behind the tail boom, washing the aircraft in strong backlight. After a few seconds, she turned slightly to adjust her angle and stepped closer to the rope line, raising the camera toward eye level. Passenger footage later showed her shifting position 1 step at a time, moving sideways along the pad rather than forward with the rest of the group. The main rotor wash lifted dust across the ground, and the tail rotor remained a faint blur against the light. From the front of the aircraft, a voice called out as she crossed beyond the guide rope. The pilot's view stayed limited to the left side of the helicopter, leaving the rear section partially obscured. At 5:51 p.m., she continued walking toward the tail, the aircraft still fully running. Within seconds, she entered the tail rotor arc. The blade struck the upper right side of her neck and shoulder at high speed, producing multiple rapid contacts in less than a second. Witnesses described a sharp cracking sound before she collapsed forward onto the mesa surface. The helicopter shuddered as vibration traveled through the airframe, and a rotor imbalance alert appeared in the cockpit. The pilot immediately initiated shutdown procedures. Emergency services were contacted without delay, and Hualapai Fire and EMS arrived on scene in roughly 22 minutes. Carla had no pulse on their arrival and was pronounced deceased. The medical examiner documented deep lacerations and blunt strike injuries to the right side of the neck, a fractured collarbone, and multiple upper rib fractures. The right carotid artery and internal jugular vein were severed, leading to rapid and extensive blood loss. Her cervical spine was fractured, and the spinal cord was severely damaged at a high level. The cause of death was listed as catastrophic neck trauma with rapid hemorrhage caused by contact with a rotating tail rotor. The manner of death was ruled an accident. Carla's blog remained online for more than a year after the incident, including an unfinished draft about the West Rim flight. Following the investigation, the tour operator updated exit procedures and added a second ground crew member to monitor the rear hazard area during passenger disembarkation. It was July 4th, 2015, at Desert View Overlook, along the eastern edge of Grand Canyon National Park in northern Arizona. Late evening temperatures remained in the upper 70s as visitors gathered along the stone observation walls and open rock surfaces overlooking cliffs more than 5,000 feet below. The overlook was crowded with tourists watching the fading daylight settle across the canyon. Among them was 24-year-old Darren Swick. He had traveled from out of state with several friends during the Independence Day weekend. Darren worked at a small vehicle repair shop and was known among friends as outgoing and eager to take part in whatever activity the group was doing. Earlier that afternoon, the group had been driving along the park road, stopping at several viewpoints before eventually reaching Desert View near sunset. While traveling outside the park boundary earlier that day, Darren and his friends stopped at a roadside vendor along a nearby highway. One of them purchased several consumer-grade aerial fireworks, small shells designed to launch from cardboard tubes before exploding in the air. Fireworks are prohibited throughout Grand Canyon National Park. The group kept them with their supplies as they continued driving toward the overlook. By the time darkness began settling across Desert View, many visitors were returning toward the parking area. Darren and his friends walked onto a wide section of exposed rock several yards away from the stone safety wall. According to later statements from the group, Darren suggested setting off one of the fireworks while they were still at the overlook. The aerial shells were designed to be launched from cardboard mortar tubes placed securely on level ground. Instead, Darren positioned the tube upright directly on the bare sandstone surface near where the group was standing. The tube was not buried in soil or braced with rocks. The sandstone beneath it was uneven, with shallow slopes and ridges common to weathered canyon rock. Despite the unstable surface, Darren volunteered to ignite the fuse while the others stepped several feet away. When the fuse burned down to the lift charge, the ignition force pushed against the lightweight cardboard tube. The uneven rock surface caused the tube to tip sideways at the moment the shell fired. Instead of launching upward into the air, the aerial shell shot horizontally across the rock surface toward the group. The device detonated almost immediately after leaving the tube, exploding at ground level only a few feet from where Darren was standing. Visitors across the overlook later reported hearing a sharp explosion echo across the canyon rim. People near the parking area turned toward the sound and saw several individuals moving quickly away from the rock surface, while others ran toward someone lying near the launch point. Fragments from the exploding shell scattered across the surrounding rock. Darren collapsed beside the spot where the firework had detonated. His friends attempted to assist him, while nearby visitors used mobile phones to contact emergency services. Park rangers and emergency responders arrived at the overlook shortly afterward and secured the immediate area. Medical personnel determined that Darren had sustained severe traumatic injuries to the neck and upper airway caused by explosive fragments from the aerial shell. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators later documented the debris field and recovered the remaining fireworks from the group. The cardboard launch tube was found lying on its side near the detonation point, consistent with witness accounts describing how the tube had tipped over during ignition. Investigators concluded that the aerial shell detonated at close range after the unstable tube redirected the launch horizontally across the ground, causing fatal injuries from blast force and shrapnel. Fireworks are prohibited throughout Grand Canyon National Park. It was July 19, 2016. And the late afternoon sky above Hopi Point displayed the ominous characteristics of an approaching monsoon storm. Dark cumulonimbus clouds towered to heights exceeding 40,000 feet, their anvil-shaped tops spreading across the western horizon. The temperature had dropped from 89 degrees to 72 degrees within 30 minutes, while lightning flickered intermittently within the cloud formations, accompanied by distant rumbles of thunder. Evan Hearn, a 28-year-old warehouse loader from Phoenix, had driven up alone for an impromptu evening hike along the South Rim Trail system. Known among co-workers for his stubborn independence and tendency to dismiss safety warnings, Evan had a history of pushing through adverse conditions during outdoor activities. He had arrived wearing standard hiking clothes and tennis shoes, carrying only a water bottle and his cell phone. The National Weather Service had issued severe thunderstorm warnings for the entire Grand Canyon region, with specific advisories about lightning dangers on exposed rim areas. Posted signs at trailheads warned visitors to seek immediate shelter when thunder was audible. But Evan had dismissed these precautions as overly cautious. He believed his familiarity with Arizona weather patterns made him capable of judging the actual risk level. Hopi Point offered one of the most exposed overlooks along the South Rim, jutting out into the canyon with minimal natural shelter. The rocky promontory consisted primarily of Kaibab limestone formations, with scattered pinyon pine and juniper trees. The elevation of 7,071 feet made the location particularly susceptible to lightning strikes during electrical storms. As Evan walked along the exposed rim trail, the storm system continued its rapid approach from the southwest. Lightning strikes became increasingly frequent, with thunder following at intervals of less than 10 seconds, indicating the electrical activity was within 2 miles of his position. Other hikers had already retreated to their vehicles or sought shelter, leaving Evan essentially alone on the exposed overlook. The atmospheric conditions created an ideal environment for cloud-to-ground lightning strikes. The elevated terrain, combined with Evan's position as the highest conductive object in the immediate area, significantly increased his risk of being struck. The approaching storm cell generated powerful electrical charges, seeking the path of least resistance to ground. A massive lightning bolt discharged from the storm cloud directly overhead, following the natural electrical gradient toward the highest available conductor. The primary strike hit a limestone outcropping approximately 15 feet from where Evan was standing, delivering an estimated 30,000 amperes of electrical current to the rocky surface. The electrical energy created a side flash that arced through the air to Evan's body, entering through his left shoulder and exiting through his feet. The massive electrical current disrupted his cardiac rhythm instantly, causing immediate cardiac arrest. The strike also created distinctive burn patterns on his upper back and shoulder, while the electrical shock threw him backward onto a flat limestone ledge. Other visitors who had taken shelter in the parking area witnessed the lightning strike and immediately called emergency services. Park rangers responded from the South Rim station, reaching Hopi Point within 10 minutes. They found Evan unresponsive on the rocky ledge, with obvious signs of lightning strike injuries, including characteristic burn patterns and electrical entry wounds. Despite immediate CPR attempts and the use of an automated external defibrillator, rangers were unable to restore cardiac function. Evan was pronounced dead at the scene, with the official cause of death listed as cardiac arrest due to lightning strike. The subsequent investigation confirmed that the victim had ignored multiple weather warnings and remained in an exposed area during active electrical storm conditions. Rangers documented the lightning strike pattern and burn evidence, noting that the victim's elevated position on the exposed promontory had created optimal conditions for a side flash from the nearby strike. It was June 22, 2018, at Lipan Point on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. Late afternoon temperatures exceeded 95 degrees Fahrenheit as steady winds pushed heat across the overlook. Sun-baked stone radiated stored heat, creating an oven-like environment along the exposed rim. 30-year-old Stella Young had arrived with friends to capture sunset photographs at the scenic viewpoint. Working as a freelance graphic designer, she often sought dramatic lighting and unique angles for her creative projects. Friends later stated that Stella often became careless with equipment when focused on getting the perfect shot. She had brought along several photography props, including a small handheld butane torch used for creating dramatic lighting effects. The overlook featured warning signs that specifically prohibited open flames near the dry vegetation and cliff edges. The combination of extreme heat, low humidity, and constant wind created ideal conditions for rapid fire spread. Park regulations strictly forbade any type of open flame or ignition source in the area. Multiple warning signs were posted throughout the overlook, explicitly banning open flames, ignition devices, and fuel use due to wildfire risk. Several visitors later stated that Stella was verbally warned that flames were prohibited in the area. Despite those warnings, she chose to proceed with her setup. Stella continued arranging her shots and used a butane torch to create lighting effects. She carried the torch along with a pocket-sized butane refill canister in her jacket pocket. The torch had been used earlier in the day and remained warm from recent operation and prolonged exposure to the extreme heat. As the afternoon progressed, the sun-exposed rock surfaces continued to radiate stored heat, creating surface temperatures that exceeded 100 degrees. The steady wind pushed this superheated air across the overlook, creating an environment where any flammable materials would ignite rapidly. Stella attempted to refill the torch while it was still warm from recent use, not allowing adequate cooling time. She set both the torch and refill canister on the sun-heated stone surface while preparing for the refueling, allowing the metal canister to absorb additional heat from the superheated rock. The combination of the heated torch housing, the warming fuel canister, and the extreme ambient temperature created dangerous conditions for handling pressurized butane fuel. As she attempted to connect the refill canister to the torch, pressurized butane began escaping improperly from the connection point. The volatile fuel immediately vaporized in the extreme heat, forming a concentrated vapor cloud around her hands and upper body. The invisible gas cloud expanded rapidly in the hot, moving air, creating a highly combustible mixture. When Stella triggered the torch ignition mechanism, the accumulated butane vapor ignited instantly in a flash fire. The sudden combustion created a brief but intense fireball that engulfed her head, neck, and upper torso. The extreme heat caused the pressurized refill canister to fail, releasing fuel in a violent flare that intensified the fire and knocked her backward onto the rocky surface. The flash fire and canister failure caused severe thermal burns to her head, neck, and upper body. Witnesses reported that she collapsed moments after the ignition and did not respond to attempts to assist her. Emergency responders later determined that she died from complications related to extensive burn injuries and inhalation damage. Nearby visitors witnessed the sudden fireball and immediately called for emergency response while attempting to provide assistance. The brief fire extinguished quickly, but the damage from the initial flash ignition and rapid fuel release had already caused catastrophic injuries. Park rangers and emergency medical personnel arrived within 20 minutes. When they reached Stella, they found extensive burn injuries consistent with a butane vapor ignition and pressurized container failure. The torch and ruptured fuel canister were recovered as evidence. Fire investigators determined that the ignition was preventable, caused by improper handling of pressurized butane fuel and the use of an open flame in a restricted area. The official report noted that the torch was refilled while still warm in extreme heat, allowing fuel vapor to accumulate before igniting. Investigators concluded that the incident would not have occurred if park regulations had been followed. It was June 2, 2013. At Mather Point on the south rim of the Grand Canyon, visitors moved between guardrails and exposed limestone shelves. Beyond the railing gaps, the ground dropped sharply into layered rock and broken ledges. Lena Brooks was 21, a photography student from Henderson, Nevada. She worked part-time at a print shop and was building a wildlife portfolio for transfer applications. She understood lighting and framing, but had no training in wildlife behavior or rim safety. Her social media featured close animal shots taken at close range. Rock squirrels at the Grand Canyon cause more reported injuries than any other animal in the park. They are aggressive around food and will lunge. Signs at Mather Point warn visitors not to feed wildlife and to remain behind railings. Rangers regularly issue citations for feeding animals. That morning, temperatures were rising into the upper 80s. Lena noticed a squirrel moving between visitors near the rim. Instead of photographing it from a distance, she climbed over a low stone wall marked with warning signs and entered a closed, exposed rock section. She set her backpack down near the edge. She lowered herself onto the limestone within arm's reach of a steep drop. The surface sloped slightly toward open air and was coated in loose sand and small fragments. She positioned her phone behind her on burst mode and extended her legs outward toward the canyon. To lure the squirrel, she placed pieces of granola on her palm. When it hesitated, she leaned forward, shifting closer to the edge to remove background distractions. Witnesses later said she repositioned twice, moving inches nearer to open space. The squirrel lunged and clamped onto her thumb and part of her palm. Witnesses heard her scream. Blood appeared immediately. The animal released and jumped back. She jerked her arm backward and tried to stand at the same time. The motion shifted her weight behind her heels. Her left foot slid on loose grit. Limestone fragments displaced under pressure. Investigators later documented disturbed sand and scuff marks less than a foot from the rim. Two nearby visitors saw her stumble backward. She stepped again to recover, but there was no ground behind her. Her heel crossed the edge. Her torso tilted sharply. She flailed once and fell backward over the rim. Witnesses heard her scream as she dropped. Small rocks broke loose and fell with her. Search teams later determined she struck a sloped rock face approximately 130 feet below before tumbling onto a narrow ledge. A bystander called emergency services at 10:42 a.m. Rangers arrived within 8 minutes and secured the area. Due to the steep terrain, a rope rescue team descended later that day and confirmed she had no signs of life. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death blunt force trauma from a high fall. The impact caused multiple fractures, including a fracture at the upper cervical spine that severed the spinal cord, stopping breathing and heart function immediately. Additional chest and abdominal injuries were consistent with high-speed impact against rock. The squirrel bite was a deep puncture, but not life-threatening. Investigators concluded that feeding wildlife and sitting inches from an unprotected drop directly led to the fall. Her phone remained on the rim. Burst mode captured the squirrel lunging, her recoil, and then empty sky as she disappeared. The death was ruled accidental, but preventable. It was attributed to feeding wildlife and stepping beyond guardrails into a closed area near the edge. Park officials reinforced wildlife enforcement at Mather Point and later referenced the case in safety briefings. Her photography program displayed several of her landscape images in a campus exhibit. It was May 11, 2018. Desert view on the south rim was dry and bright that late morning, with a light wind moving across the overlooks as visitors walked along the rim. From a distance, the edge looked firm and dependable. But beyond the maintained path, the ground was formed from weathered limestone that could split into thin, fragile shelves. Those fractured sections weren't reinforced, and a hard step near a crack could cause the rock to give way without warning. Standing near the cliff was Eric Dalton, 29, a warehouse logistics coordinator from Albuquerque who managed freight schedules and shift coverage. Outside of work, he spent hours scrolling through short, viral stunt clips, often discussing bigger ideas for moments that would stand out on video. 2 months earlier, he had been passed over for a promotion, and friends later said he became more focused on doing something memorable outside of work, especially when a camera was involved. That morning, Eric arrived with his girlfriend, Priya Menon, and his co-worker, Davis Tran. Priya did not know he planned to propose. Eric carried a small ring in his jacket pocket and, after watching several proposal stunt videos online, decided to jump a visible gap along the rim and kneel on the far side while Davis recorded. They walked roughly 400 yards past the maintained overlook to a fractured section where 2 limestone lobes were separated by a gap just over 6 feet at its narrowest point. From about 90 feet away, a couple stopped and watched as Eric stepped back nearly 20 feet to measure his run. He approached twice and stopped at the last second, testing distance and footing. On the third attempt, Davis began recording, and another bystander lifted a phone, assuming they were about to film a stunt. Eric accelerated into a full sprint. His right foot planted inches from the rim lip. The limestone shelf beneath it failed instantly. A sharp crack echoed across the edge as a slab roughly a foot wide sheared inward along an existing fracture. The rock dropped under his weight. His planted foot fell with it, leaving him without lift. His body pitched forward and slightly right, momentum carrying him toward the far side without lift. He did not clear the gap. His hips struck the vertical face of the opposite lobe, folding him at the waist and redirecting his motion downward instead of across. His hands scraped against rock but found nothing to grip. He slid over the rim, torso first, legs trailing as fragments of limestone followed him into open air. Davis's recording captured the moment the rock broke, and Eric vanished from the frame. The second phone, farther back, maintained a wider view as he rolled out of sight. The fall measured roughly 200 feet from rim to talus. Witnesses reported seeing him strike the rock face once, then again against a projecting ledge before tumbling across broken stone near the base. His body rotated mid-air after the first impact, striking again at a different angle before continuing downward. Each impact altered his position before he disappeared below the rim line. Loose rock continued to fall for several seconds after. Emergency services were contacted immediately through the park network, and rangers dispatched search and rescue within minutes. Ground teams descended by established switchbacks before crossing unstable talus to reach him. Eric was found on a sloped field of fractured limestone, with no pulse or breathing, and death was confirmed at the scene. The medical examiner documented severe blunt force trauma, including major head injuries, pelvic fractures, and extensive internal bleeding consistent with a high fall. Investigators recovered the engagement ring from his jacket and reviewed both recordings as evidence. The fractured rim edge was photographed and marked to discourage access, and the case was closed as an accidental off-trail fall beyond a maintained overlook. It was April 21st, 2018, in the backcountry along the Hermit Trail area of the Grand Canyon in northern Arizona. Spring weather had settled across the canyon plateau. Temperatures hovered in the low 70s, and the dry trail wound through steep switchbacks and exposed slopes where reliable water sources were scarce. 41-year-old Kevin Blate had arrived earlier that day, planning to hike several miles down the trail and camp overnight before returning the next morning. Kevin worked as a maintenance technician and had recently begun taking longer desert hikes during his free time. Although comfortable working with tools and equipment, he had limited experience with extended backcountry travel. Before the trip, Kevin had read online that small amounts of household bleach could be used in emergencies to disinfect untreated water. Instead of carrying a water filter or purification tablets, equipment commonly used by experienced hikers, he brought a plastic squeeze bottle filled with concentrated bleach. Without measuring tools or clear instructions, the plan depended entirely on guessing the correct amount. Earlier that afternoon, Kevin collected water from a shallow drainage channel near the trail. The water was cloudy and carried sediment from recent runoff, but small pools like this were sometimes used by hikers when no other sources were available. After reaching a small clearing beside the trail where he planned to camp, Kevin poured the untreated water into a container he carried for drinking and attempted to disinfect it using the bottle of household bleach he had brought with him. Without measuring tools, he estimated the amount by squeezing the bottle directly into the water, adding several heavy squeezes instead of the few carefully measured drops normally recommended for emergency purification. The mixture quickly produced a strong chlorine odor around the campsite, yet the treated water was consumed shortly afterward. Within minutes, Kevin began experiencing severe irritation in his throat and stomach as the concentrated bleach solution caused chemical burns inside his mouth and digestive tract, followed quickly by nausea. Hikers traveling along the trail corridor later reported hearing faint coughing and repeated retching sounds echoing up from a campsite somewhere below the trail that evening. The noises continued for some time before gradually fading, but none of the hikers were able to locate the source in the fading light. Evidence later documented at the campsite suggested Kevin remained severely ill for an extended period. The ground around the tent showed signs of repeated vomiting, and the drinking container sat nearby beside the squeeze bottle containing the bleach solution. At some point during the night, Kevin collapsed beside the campsite. The following morning, hikers passing through the same stretch of trail noticed a man lying motionless near the tent and alerted park rangers working in the area. Responders reached the campsite and confirmed that Kevin Blate was deceased. Investigators photographed the scene and recovered the squeeze bottle containing the remaining bleach, while the drinking container still held traces of the heavily concentrated mixture. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death to be complications from bleach ingestion combined with severe dehydration caused by repeated vomiting and fluid loss. Investigators concluded the fatality resulted from the improper use of concentrated household bleach as a water purification method. Emergency purification methods typically require only a few carefully measured drops of diluted bleach in a large container of water. Instead, Kevin had estimated the amount by squeezing concentrated bleach directly into his drinking supply. Rangers later noted that most backcountry hikers carry simple filtration systems or purification tablets when treating untreated water sources, equipment specifically intended to prevent mistakes like this. It was October 3rd, 2015, and cool autumn air settled over Phantom Ranch, 2,400 feet below the canyon rim. Campers gathered among cottonwood trees and shared cooking areas as darkness approached. Kendra Loft, a 33-year-old restaurant worker from Tucson, had hiked down with 3 close friends for a weekend camping trip. Known for her meticulous planning and love of outdoor cooking, Kendra had packed an extensive array of camping gear, including a compact butane stove she had purchased at a discount outdoor store several months earlier. She took pride in preparing elaborate meals even in wilderness settings, often surprising her companions with gourmet dishes cooked over portable equipment. The group had secured a campsite among the designated tent sites, where nearby campers were preparing meals using high-output gas stoves and propane lanterns. Several cooking stations had been operating for nearly 2 hours, their burner flames glowing steadily in the still evening air. Kendra had set up her cooking area about 6 feet from a nearby cooking station, arranging her equipment on a flat boulder that served as a makeshift preparation surface. Her portable butane stove showed visible signs of wear, including a noticeable dent on one side of the fuel canister that had occurred during a previous camping trip. The damage had created a small stress point in the metal, though the stove had continued to function normally during several subsequent uses. Kendra had planned to replace the unit, but had postponed the purchase due to its continued operation. As evening approached, she began preparing dinner for the group, setting up the stove on the boulder surface near the heat of a nearby gas burner. Her friends noticed the damaged canister and suggested waiting or moving to a cooler location, but Kendra was eager to begin cooking before complete darkness set in. She attempted to attach a fresh butane cartridge to the stove assembly, unaware that damage to the fuel canister and the proximity to open flame had created dangerous conditions. As she manipulated the connection, pressurized butane began leaking from the damaged area. The invisible vapors spread rapidly in the still evening air, creating a volatile cloud of flammable gas around the cooking area. The fuel ignited instantly as the vapor cloud drifted toward the open flame of a nearby camp stove, creating a sudden fireball that expanded approximately 3 feet in all directions. The damaged canister ruptured under pressure, releasing a sudden burst of flame and burning fuel across the immediate area. The explosion threw Kendra backward as flash burns seared her torso, face, and arms, while the concussive force caused severe blunt trauma to her chest and head. Nearby campers witnessed the sudden flash and immediately rushed to assist, dousing the flames with water from their containers and smothering the burning fuel with nearby gear and sand. The explosion had scattered burning fuel across the campsite, requiring several minutes to fully extinguish all ignited materials. Park rangers stationed at Phantom Ranch responded within 8 to 10 minutes of the initial emergency calls. They found Kendra unconscious with critical injuries from the blast trauma and extensive burns covering approximately 40% of her body. Despite immediate medical intervention and attempts to stabilize her condition, she was pronounced dead at the campsite. The subsequent investigation revealed that the damaged fuel canister had failed under pressure, leaking butane that ignited upon contact with the open burner flame of a nearby cooking station. Rangers documented the stress fracture and improper placement near an active flame as the primary cause of the explosion. The official report cited improper equipment maintenance and unsafe fuel handling near heat sources as contributing factors. The incident became a cautionary example used in ranger-led safety talks and educational materials about the dangers of using damaged fuel canisters near open flames. Park officials referenced the case to emphasize the importance of regular equipment maintenance and proper safety protocols in wilderness camping environments. It was August 2, 2015, and the Bright Angel Trail descended into the Grand Canyon under a scorching Arizona sun. The popular hiking route zigzagged down the south wall of the canyon through steep switchbacks, facing north into the inner gorge, with temperatures already climbing past 100 degrees by mid-morning. An active heat advisory had been issued for the region, with meteorologists warning that exposed areas could reach dangerous levels exceeding 105 degrees. 34-year-old Sela Gobb arrived at the trailhead alone, planning what she believed was a manageable day hike to the 3-mile rest house. She had researched the trail distance in advance, but ignored the extreme heat forecast for that day, focusing on mileage rather than conditions. That decision left her unprepared for the environment she was about to enter. Park rangers had positioned themselves at the trailhead since early morning, actively advising hikers to turn back due to the dangerous temperature conditions, warnings Sella heard before starting her descent. Posted warnings throughout the area emphasized the critical importance of carrying adequate water, with recommendations of 1 gallon per person for summer hiking. The trail's exposed sections offered no natural shade. Sella had gathered her hiking gear, which consisted of a small day pack, her camera, and snacks for the trail. In her focus on organizing her route and timing, she had left her water bottle sitting in the car's cup holder. She realized the oversight only after beginning her descent, but chose not to turn back, believing she could reach the first rest station despite the heat. The initial section of trail wound through relatively shaded areas near the rim where temperatures remained in the upper 90s. Sella maintained a steady pace, feeling confident about her fitness level. However, as the trail descended deeper into the canyon, the protective shade disappeared, and she found herself hiking across fully exposed switchbacks where the sun's intensity was amplified by reflection off the surrounding rock walls. By the time she had descended below the first major rest point, the ambient temperature had climbed past 105 degrees. The trail surface itself radiated additional heat, creating an oven-like environment where signs of heat-related distress became increasingly apparent. Without water to replace fluids lost through perspiration, her body began showing early signs of heat-related stress. Sella's movement gradually became slower and less coordinated as she continued down the exposed switchbacks. Her skin grew hot and dry as her body's cooling mechanisms became overwhelmed. Witnesses later reported that her balance deteriorated and her movements became increasingly uncoordinated, but she continued hiking rather than turning back toward the cooler rim areas. Witnesses later reported that she passed the 3-mile rest house without stopping, despite showing visible signs of distress. On a steep section of trail just beyond the rest station, Sella's condition deteriorated rapidly. Witnesses reported seeing her moving unsteadily before she collapsed onto the trail surface. Her skin appeared flushed and dry, signs consistent with advanced heat stroke. As she attempted to rise, she lost her balance and collapsed beside the maintained path, striking her head as she fell. Her head struck the compacted stone surface with significant force, causing a severe head injury that rendered her unconscious. The combination of severe dehydration, heat stroke, and traumatic head injury created a medical emergency that would have required immediate intervention to survive. Passing hikers discovered Sella within minutes and immediately contacted park rangers. The witnesses attempted to provide basic first aid while waiting for medical response. Emergency personnel reached the scene within 45 minutes, but Sella was already unresponsive. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later determined that she died from complications related to heat exposure, dehydration, and blunt force head trauma sustained during her fall. Park investigators documented the incident as a heat-related death with secondary trauma from an uncontrolled fall. The official report noted that the victim had been hiking without water during an active heat advisory, and that dehydration and heat stroke had contributed to her collapse and subsequent fatal head injury. It was May 18, 2016. Near Pipe Creek Beach along the Colorado River, the afternoon looked deceptively calm. The water moved with a steady surface glide beneath bright desert light. Heat pressed down from the canyon walls, and the long climb back to the south rim waited above. Evan Klein was 29, a warehouse supervisor from Flagstaff who filmed weekend survival challenges for a small YouTube channel. He built his content around dismissing safety advice as exaggeration. Co-workers described him as competitive, especially when he could prove others wrong on camera. He had completed several rim-to-river hikes and owned decent camping gear, but he had no river training, no swiftwater course, no experience swimming in current, and no understanding of dam-controlled flow. The Colorado River remains between 46 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Mid-channel currents commonly move 6 to 8 miles per hour. Rangers and guides repeatedly warn hikers not to attempt crossings. By mid-afternoon at Pipe Creek Beach, sand temperatures were above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The Bright Angel Trail climb ahead meant nearly 10 miles and 4,400 feet of elevation gain. Instead of starting up, Evan aimed his camera toward the opposite bank and claimed he could save hours by crossing and climbing out from there. No marked trail was visible across the river. Warning boards nearby referenced cold shock, strong current, and drowning. Rafting groups eddied downstream. His friends reminded him that the maintained trail was the only exit, but he insisted he had a way to manage the cold water. From his backpack, he pulled 2 large contractor-grade trash bags and wrapped them around his torso, sealing them with duct tape to trap heat. He inflated a 3rd trash bag as makeshift flotation and clipped it to his pack. He kept his hiking shoes on, saying the weight would help him cut through the current. He wore cargo shorts and a chest-mounted action camera. He did not secure the plastic around his arms or test the current beyond ankle depth. He stepped in slowly. At knee depth, he reacted to the cold. At waist depth, his breathing changed. Instead of backing out, he leaned forward and pushed off into a swim. The cold shock response hit immediately. Witnesses heard a short shout, cut off mid-breath. The plastic bags collapsed as water displaced trapped air. His mouth opened as his head snapped back, drawing in river water. His breathing became rapid and uncontrolled. The current caught him broadside within seconds. The loosely clipped, air-filled bag tore free and drifted away. The taped plastic tightened across his chest and restricted arm movement. His backpack shifted and pulled him off balance. Soaked clothing and shoes increased drag. He tried to stroke toward the far bank, but drifted downstream instead. About 20 feet from shore, his head went under. He resurfaced coughing, then slipped beneath again. Downstream, a partially submerged cottonwood trunk extended into the deeper current. From shore, it blended with glare. The flow carried him directly into it. Recovered footage later showed brown turbulence, a sudden jolt, and wood filling the frame as his chest struck the trunk while the current forced his lower body downstream. Rafters saw the impact, and a guide called for help by satellite phone. The current pinned his torso against the wood. The taped plastic constricted as he struggled. Each attempt to lift his head forced him back under. Within seconds, his movements weakened before the river rolled him free downstream. River rangers launched but lost sight of him around a bend. Search crews continued until dusk. His body was recovered the next morning, about 2 miles downstream, caught against rocks in slower water. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death to be drowning. Sudden immersion in 48-degree water triggered involuntary gasping and early water inhalation before the current overwhelmed him. Sand and silt were found in his lungs. His camera was recovered on a sandbar. The final footage showed his entry, the collapse of the improvised flotation, rapid breathing distress, and entrapment. The case was later referenced in river safety briefings as an example of how ignoring a marked trail and relying on plastic insulation can turn fatal within a minute. It was June 7, 2013. The Colorado River moved steadily past the Havasu Creek confluence, green water sliding along sandstone walls that appeared calm from a distance. Near the bank, the surface looked smooth and slow. Beneath it, the current pushed with quiet force. Several boats were pulled to shore upstream. Leah Morgan, 31, was part of a permitted multi-day river trip that had stopped near the Havasu Creek confluence. She worked as a medical billing specialist in Flagstaff and often shared short live streams during outdoor trips, treating them as a way to stay connected while documenting the experience in real time. That afternoon, she planned to paddle briefly near camp to capture close views of the canyon walls for friends watching online. Leah owned a used recreational sit-in kayak designed for stable, flat water paddling. It handled predictably on calm stretches, but was not built for tight turns near rock, quick corrections in moving current. She wore a life vest, but carried no throw rope and had never practiced emergency exits in moving water. Along this stretch, shallow sandstone undercuts created sideways current that pressed silently toward the wall, even where the surface appeared calm. That afternoon, the group allowed a short paddle window, while rafts were staged downstream. Participants stayed within sight of camp. 2 kayakers drifted ahead, while Marcus Ossie, 34, remained about 30 feet behind Leah. A commercial guide's raft was upriver within radio range. Leah's phone was mounted to her chest in a waterproof case, live streaming casually to friends. The calm approach to the wall was recorded, and what followed was captured as well. Leah angled her kayak toward the right wall, glancing down at her phone between strokes. The water beside the sandstone looked flat and slow. In reality, a subtle lateral current pressed toward the rock. That morning's safety talk had covered undercuts and the need to stay off canyon walls. Leah moved closer anyway, focusing on the view and the screen in front of her. Her bow made light contact with sandstone. The sideways push caught the hull and rotated it broadside to the flow. Once broadside, the kayak lost stability quickly. Marcus later said he saw the upstream edge dip and recognized the problem as it began. The kayak rolled. Leah entered the water on the upstream side and did not complete a clean exit from the cockpit. The inverted boat pressed against her as the current drove both toward the undercut. She surfaced briefly, pulling in air, then reached toward the rock to push away. Her right leg slipped into a narrow gap between submerged rock shelves, about a foot below the surface. The current forced her sideways and held her thigh tight between stone edges. Water pressure pinned her body nearly horizontal. She tried to pull free, hands scraping at rock as the current continued to press her into the wall. Marcus flipped as he lunged toward her and struggled free of his kayak before reaching the bank and signaling for help. Her hands broke the surface for only seconds, striking at the water before slipping under and not returning. Emergency services were notified immediately over park radio, and the call was logged shortly after 2:15 p.m. Rescue crews began moving toward the site, but entry required controlled positioning and active current before divers could safely enter the water. Rescue personnel arrived at approximately 4:05 p.m. Divers located Leah in 8 feet of water, still wedged by the leg. Extraction required prying tools to widen the rock gap enough to release her without additional trauma. Her phone continued recording until it submerged and lost signal. She showed no signs of life when brought to shore. The medical examiner found deep bruising on her right thigh consistent with prolonged compression against rock. Her fingernails were broken from scraping stone, and both lungs contained water, confirming active breathing during submersion. No heart defects or intoxicants were detected. The cause of death was drowning due to entrapment against submerged rock, ruled accidental. Evidence indicated she lost consciousness within minutes of being pinned, with no realistic chance of escape. The live stream remained online for months before her family requested removal. Marcus gave a full statement and later sought counseling. The outfitter updated its safety briefing to prohibit solo paddling near canyon walls and filming while maneuvering. Her study binder was found in her vehicle, practice exams highlighted and unfinished. It was July 2, 2016, along the Bright Angel Trail inside the Grand Canyon. Early summer temperatures had already climbed well past 100 degrees Fahrenheit by midday, and the canyon walls trapped heat along the lower elevations. While the terrain looked clear from above, trails below the rim could quickly disappear once hikers left the maintained routes. Melissa Drisk, a 33-year-old traveler who worked in a creative field that allowed remote assignments, had arrived alone that morning after several weeks visiting parks across the Southwest. She frequently documented landscapes during her trips and had recently read about a viewpoint along the Tonto platform described in an online travel blog. The location appeared reachable from the Bright Angel Trail if a hiker followed a faint path branching away from the maintained route. Melissa carried a small backpack containing a camera, 2 granola bars, and roughly 1 liter of water, far less than what park warnings recommend for summer hikes inside the canyon. She also had no trail map, navigation device, or emergency communication equipment, despite warning signs at the Bright Angel Trailhead advising hikers to stay on marked routes and carry multiple liters of water during extreme heat. The Bright Angel Trail descended steadily through exposed rock formations and sparse vegetation. By late morning, Melissa had traveled several miles down the maintained trail. At a bend in the trail overlooking a broad desert shelf, she left the established route and followed a faint foot track leading east across the Tonto platform. At first, the path appeared clear enough to follow. The ground consisted of packed dust, scattered stones, and shallow washes carved by occasional rain. However, the track gradually faded as it crossed areas where wind and erosion erased footprints. Several similar-looking paths branched through low shrubs and rocky ridges. Without markers or prominent landmarks, the terrain became difficult to navigate. By early afternoon, temperatures across the exposed plateau exceeded 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The ground radiated heat, and shade was limited to small rock overhangs and short desert bushes. Evidence later documented through footprints suggested Melissa moved several miles across the plateau, attempting to relocate a recognizable trail. The terrain across the Tonto platform is uneven and broken by shallow ravines, forcing frequent detours. Investigators later concluded Melissa likely became disoriented as the faint tracks she followed gradually disappeared into similar terrain. At some point that afternoon, Melissa exhausted the water in her backpack. Footprint patterns discovered later suggested she continued moving intermittently between scattered patches of shade, occasionally stopping beneath rock ledges or shrubs. Over the next 2 days, temperatures inside the canyon remained above 100 degrees Fahrenheit during daylight hours. Without water, dehydration develops rapidly under those conditions. Tracks discovered during the search indicated shorter movement distances over time before eventually stopping near a dry wash surrounded by scattered rocks, roughly 4 miles from the nearest maintained trail. Melissa's vehicle remained parked near the Bright Angel trailhead overnight. When it remained there the following day without activity, park staff initiated a search of nearby trails. Search teams working the plateau located a sequence of footprints crossing the dusty terrain east of the Bright Angel corridor. Following those tracks eventually led them to Melissa's body beside the dry wash. Her backpack was found nearby containing the camera, empty water container, and uneaten granola bars. Investigators documented the absence of navigation equipment or additional water supplies. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was severe dehydration and heat exposure. Environmental records confirmed temperatures in that part of the canyon had remained above 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the time she was missing. Investigators concluded the incident began when Melissa left the established trail and became lost across the unmarked terrain of the Tonto platform. With limited water and no navigation equipment, the extreme desert heat quickly turned a short off-trail detour into a fatal situation. Park officials later reminded visitors to remain on marked trails and carry adequate water when hiking inside the canyon. It was July 9, 2017, at Yaqui Point, where late afternoon sun lit flat sandstone slabs near the canyon rim. Loose gravel scattered across weathered rock as jagged boulders lined the edge. Tilda Pogue, a 26-year-old college student from Tempe, had arrived with 3 friends for an afternoon of sightseeing and photography. Known for her adventurous spirit and passion for parkour training, Tilda had spent the past 2 years developing her athletic skills at local gyms and outdoor locations. She was studying exercise science and often incorporated challenging physical movements into her recreational activities, viewing natural rock formations as opportunities to practice her techniques. The group had been exploring various viewpoints along the South Rim for several hours, with Tilda consistently seeking out interesting terrain features that could serve as parkour obstacles. The afternoon heat and hours of hiking had begun to take their toll, though Tilda's enthusiasm remained undiminished. At Yaqui Point, Tilda identified a flat sandstone slab that appeared perfect for practicing precision jumps. The rock formation measured approximately 8 feet in length and 4 feet in width, positioned several feet back from jagged sandstone boulders that marked the transition to the canyon's edge. The surface showed signs of natural weathering, with small cracks and loose gravel deposits. Her friends positioned themselves nearby with cameras, planning to document her demonstration. They noticed the loose gravel scattered across the slab surface and voiced concerns about slipping, but Tilda dismissed their warnings as overly cautious. They also pointed out her visible fatigue, suggesting she rest first, but she insisted on attempting the movement while the lighting remained optimal. She began with basic balance movements, testing the surface conditions. The rock appeared solid beneath her feet, giving no immediate indication of weakness. Encouraged by the initial stability, she decided to attempt a more challenging precision jump across the length of the formation. Tilda positioned herself at one end of the slab and prepared for a running approach that would carry her across the entire 8-foot length. She launched into the jump with considerable force, aiming to land precisely at the opposite end. As her right foot made contact with the landing zone, it struck a patch of loose gravel that had accumulated in a shallow depression. The small stones acted like ball bearings beneath her shoe, causing her foot to slide forward while her body's momentum continued in the original direction. The sudden loss of traction threw off her balance completely. Her left ankle twisted as she tried to compensate, while her upper body pitched forward. Unable to arrest her momentum, she stumbled across the remaining distance toward the jagged sandstone boulders just short of the canyon's rim. Tilda's head and torso struck the sharp rock edges with significant force. The impact caused a basilar skull fracture at the base of her cranium and catastrophic blunt force trauma to her chest and upper spine. The collision resulted in complete cervical spine transection at the C1 to C2 level, severing her spinal cord and making survival impossible. Her friends immediately called for emergency assistance. Rangers responded from the South Rim station, reaching Yaqui Point within 10 minutes. They found Tilda unresponsive among the rock formations, with obvious signs of severe head and spinal trauma. Despite immediate medical assessment and emergency protocols, she was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was determined to be basilar skull fracture and cervical spine transection with complete spinal cord severance. The subsequent investigation revealed that loose gravel on the rock surface had caused the victim to lose her footing during the parkour attempt. Rangers documented the unstable surface conditions and the positioning of the jagged boulders near the canyon's edge as contributing factors. The report noted that the victim showed signs of physical fatigue from hours of hiking in the afternoon heat, which may have impaired her reaction time. The official report cited the attempted parkour movement on an unstable sandstone slab, combined with accumulated fatigue, as the direct cause of the accident. It was September 9, 2018, and Moran Point stretched along the south rim of the Grand Canyon under a clear afternoon sky. The overlook offered sweeping views across the canyon, with a steady breeze and temperatures in the mid-70s. 22-year-old Zancy Flitt had arrived with a group of college friends during their weekend road trip from California. A community college student, Zancy was known for his thrill-seeking behavior and constant need for attention. He regularly posted dramatic photos and videos on social media, always looking for content that would generate likes and comments. The overlook was marked by a low stone wall and informal rock boundaries indicating safe viewing areas. Beyond them, the ground sloped toward a sheer drop, with warning signs advising visitors to stay behind designated boundaries due to unstable footing. Zancy had been taking standard tourist photos when he noticed the dramatic backdrop available just beyond the informal rock boundary. The smooth limestone surface extended several feet past the safety markers, offering what appeared to be the perfect platform for a more adventurous shot. His friends had their phones ready to record as he positioned himself to perform a plank pose near the canyon edge. Intermittent wind gusts moved across the overlook throughout the afternoon, and the smooth rock surface near the rim sloped subtly toward the canyon, a grade easy to miss while focused elsewhere. Despite posted warnings and his friends' mild protests, Zancy stepped over the rock boundary and moved toward the canyon edge. He tested the surface with his feet, finding it solid and stable. The limestone felt secure beneath his sneakers, and the wind seemed manageable. His friends positioned themselves to capture the stunt from multiple angles. Zancy lowered himself into position, supporting his body weight on his hands and forearms in a standard plank pose. For the first few seconds, he maintained steady form while his friends recorded. The wind remained relatively calm as he supported his weight on the sloped rock surface beneath him. As another gust moved across the overlook, conditions already present throughout the afternoon, his palms slid on the dust-polished rock surface, the force pushing against his back and shoulders as his grip failed simultaneously. He attempted to compensate by pressing harder against the rock with his palms, but the smooth surface provided insufficient friction. His palms continued sliding forward on the stone, causing his chest to drop toward the rock lip. The change in position lifted his legs off the ground, rotating his entire body over the edge. Unable to regain his grip or reverse his momentum, Zancy went over the precipice. The fall carried him approximately 300 feet down the canyon face, with his body striking multiple rock ledges during the descent. Each impact caused severe blunt force trauma to his head, torso, and limbs. The repeated collisions resulted in fatal injuries during the descent, before his body came to rest on a narrow ledge far below. His friends immediately stopped recording and alerted park rangers through emergency communication systems. Other visitors witnessed the fall and provided additional witness accounts to responding personnel. The overlook was temporarily closed to allow emergency crews to begin recovery operations. Rangers trained in technical rescue operations were dispatched to the scene, but the remote location made immediate recovery impossible. Helicopter support was requested to access the narrow ledge where his body had come to rest. Recovery operations took several hours due to the challenging terrain. When rescue personnel reached Zancy, they confirmed he had died from massive blunt force trauma sustained during the fall. His body was recovered and transported to the rim, where it was released to the county coroner. Park investigators documented the incident as an accidental fall that occurred after the victim intentionally crossed designated safety boundaries to perform a stunt near the canyon edge. The official report noted that wind conditions, combined with the sloped rock surface and inadequate hand grip, had contributed to the victim losing control. It was July 22, 2016, near the Firehole River by Old Faithful. Steam drifted across calm-looking water as visitors waited nearby, unaware the current below was stronger than it appeared. Ashley Thompson was 20 years old, a sophomore biology major at a mid-sized Midwestern university. During the school year, she was organized and dependable, known for steady lab work, color-coded planners, and arriving early for group assignments. Friends described her as cautious when expectations were clear and boundaries defined. She was not reckless and rarely took the lead in risky situations. The trip to Yellowstone was meant to be a break from routine. Ashley was traveling with 6 sorority sisters on a post-session road trip, loosely planned and informal. Phones were present, but recording was casual and sporadic, used to capture moments rather than document events. Short clips were taken for private Snapchat stories, shared among friends without expectation of wider attention. Alcohol had been consumed gradually throughout the afternoon. No one appeared heavily impaired, but judgment and coordination were reduced. Ashley was comfortable swimming in pools and slow rivers, but had no experience with geothermal waterways. The Firehole River is shaped by thermal runoff, creating warm surface water over strong, uneven currents. Near Old Faithful, slick volcanic rock, algae, and sudden depth changes make footing unreliable. Warning signs were posted, but the busy area appeared calm and harmless. Near the riverbank, a challenge formed gradually. It began as light encouragement and turned into expectation as a few phones were raised briefly. Ashley stepped into the river fully clothed, wearing shorts, sneakers, and a sweatshirt. One short recording captured her entering the water before the phones were lowered. She moved a few steps forward as the water reached her ankles, then her calves. The current pushed unevenly against her legs, stronger than it appeared from shore. As she shifted her weight, her foot slid on the slick riverbed. She lost balance and slipped into a deeper channel where the river dropped suddenly. Once submerged, the current pulled her downstream and held her below the surface. The force of the water made it difficult to regain footing or break upward consistently. Involuntary breaths drew water into her airway, disrupting any attempt to coordinate movement. Within minutes, oxygen deprivation began to affect strength and coordination, reducing her ability to fight the current. From shore, visibility was poor. Ashley resurfaced briefly once before being pulled under again by the uneven flow. The river carried her just out of reach as the current pressed her downward. After that, she was no longer visible. Emergency services were contacted immediately when it became clear she was not resurfacing. Bystanders entered the water cautiously and searched downstream. Ashley was located and pulled from the river after several minutes of intermittent submersion, followed by a final period underwater. She was unresponsive when removed from the water. Rangers and paramedics arrived shortly after and began resuscitation efforts without delay. Despite continued attempts, Ashley did not regain consciousness and was pronounced dead at the scene. The post-mortem examination listed the cause of death as drowning. park officials stated that her death resulted from prolonged submersion after she slipped beneath the surface and was held underwater by the current. Prolonged submersion led to fatal oxygen deprivation. There were no signs of assault or external trauma. Investigators reviewed the brief recordings taken before the incident to establish timing and context. The footage showed no indication that the situation was recognized as an emergency before she lost her footing. Environmental factors, including river current, slick footing, clothing weight, and reduced coordination, were identified as contributing causes. The incident prompted renewed warnings about entering geothermal rivers. Yellowstone officials later incorporated the case into river safety briefings, emphasizing how quickly seemingly calm water can become unsurvivable once footing is lost. It was July 22, 2017. Bright Angel Point on the North Rim narrowed into exposed rock as monsoon clouds stacked overhead. Thunder was no longer distant. It rolled directly above the canyon. Rangers were actively clearing the overlook, guiding visitors walking back toward the shelter when the thunder stopped sounding distant. Daniel Rios stayed behind. At 34, the freelance photographer from Albuquerque had built an online identity around getting closer to storms than anyone else. He had no meteorology training and no lightning safety education. His income depended on dramatic proximity images. In the months leading up to that day, engagement on his pages had dropped. He had begun adding captions mocking tourist evacuations during storms, presenting himself as someone willing to stand closer than everyone else. North Rim monsoon storms develop quickly when heated rock forces moist air upward. Bright Angel Point is a narrow promontory with steep drop-offs on 3 sides and limited tree cover. During active lightning, high, isolated points are especially dangerous because electrical discharge seeks the most direct path to ground. When the interval between flash and thunder drops below 5 seconds, the strike is within roughly 1 mile. That afternoon, lightning advisories were issued through park channels. Rangers instructed visitors to leave exposed areas. Witnesses later confirmed that Daniel initially walked back with the crowd, but then stepped away from the paved path and returned to the overlook once a ranger moved on to clear another group. Rain began falling in heavy bursts, turning the limestone slick. Thunder and lightning became nearly simultaneous. Several visitors reported feeling static in the air and seeing hair rise on their arms. Daniel set up a small tripod briefly, then changed his mind, deciding it did not look dramatic enough. He switched to a 6-foot metal selfie stick with his phone attached and extended it fully overhead to elevate the camera above the stone guardrail. He stood upright near the outer curve of the point, one of the highest silhouettes on the promontory. A couple about 30 yards away began recording him after noticing he had returned despite evacuation instructions. Their footage shows Daniel laughing, arms raised, metal pole pointed straight into dark cloud cover as rain intensified. He adjusted his stance twice to keep the phone steady, remaining fully exposed. The strike occurred within seconds. The lightning either hit the raised pole directly or struck the rock immediately adjacent. Electrical current traveled through the conductive pole into his hands and down through his body into the wet limestone beneath his boots. His body locked rigid in full muscular contraction. The couple's video shows the pole snap sideways and Daniel collapses backward flat against the stone. One shoe was thrown several feet during the contraction. The phone detached from the pole and slid across the wet surface, still recording until it came to rest against the guardrail. Emergency services were called immediately. Ranger EMTs began CPR and applied a defibrillator, which showed a non-shockable rhythm consistent with cardiac arrest from lightning. An ambulance arrived about 12 minutes later. After prolonged resuscitation efforts without a pulse, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death a lightning strike. The electrical surge stopped his heart instantly. Minor burns were documented on his hands and feet, along with faint Lichtenberg patterns. Video confirmed he had returned to the exposed point after being told to leave and raised a metal pole during active lightning. Park officials later used the case in safety briefings and reinforced lightning warning signage. It was August 3, 2017. The Lower Falls Rim was quiet under steady wind, mist lifting from the river far below. Tourists leaned along the railings, unaware that beyond the boundary, a lone figure was preparing a jump that would end before the morning crowd fully arrived on the rim. One of the visitors that morning was Jake Peters, 19 years old. Jake grew up in Billings, Montana, the son of a warehouse supervisor and a night shift nurse. With his parents working opposite schedules, he learned early how to manage his own time. Parkour became his structure. He trained alone behind strip malls, drainage canals, and bridge abutments, repeating movements until they became consistent and controlled. Online, he posted short clips that emphasized precision over flash. His channel generated modest income. Small sponsors provided shoes, grip tape, and camera mounts, expecting regular uploads rather than caution. Jake tracked performance metrics closely, noting which videos gained traction. School felt slow and disconnected from measurable results, while movement offered clear feedback. Success reinforced the idea that preparation could reduce risk, even in unfamiliar environments. The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone presents conditions that are difficult to judge without specific experience. Basalt near the falls remains damp from constant spray. Lichen forms thin, pale patches that appear dry but reduce friction sharply under pressure. Wind moves unevenly along the rim, shifting direction without warning. These factors combine to create surfaces that look stable while offering little traction. On the morning of August 3rd, Jake crossed posted barriers before sunrise. He recorded setup footage as he walked, explaining the jump and positioning equipment. Wind gusts exceeded 20 miles per hour but remained steady. Rangers had issued advisories warning of slick conditions near the rim. The signs were visible, but Jake continued past them. He selected a narrow stone outcrop overlooking the canyon. There was no harness, no spotter, and no safety line. Tourists nearby watched from behind railings, assuming the situation was controlled. Jake rehearsed the jump twice, stepping closer to the edge each time. Moisture darkened the stone beneath his shoes, though nothing appeared to shift or crack. Shortly before the attempt, he posted a short clip establishing the jump and confirming it was underway. Responses appeared quickly, mixing concern with encouragement. Jake positioned himself several steps back from the edge. Wind noise increased briefly, then settled. He moved forward into the run. His push-off came slightly late. His lead foot contacted a stone coated with mist and lichen. The loss of traction was immediate. Momentum carried his body sideways, and balance could not be recovered. There was no stumble or hesitation. The edge dropped away beneath him as he passed it. Witnesses reported seeing him clear the rim fully before disappearing. The fall lasted several seconds. He struck a lower ledge shoulder first, then continued downward. The final impact occurred near the river, out of direct view, but the sound traveled upward clearly. Afterward, only wind and water were audible. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Rangers reached the rim within minutes and assessed the scene from above. There were no signs of movement. Due to terrain and safety concerns, recovery teams descended later that day. The body showed catastrophic injuries, with extensive skeletal damage and dislocation consistent with a high-velocity fall. The coroner listed the cause of death as catastrophic blunt force trauma. The skull had fragmented on impact, and internal organs were destroyed simultaneously. Death would have occurred instantly. There were no indications that medical intervention could have changed the outcome. The initial recordings were secured as evidence and later restricted. Copies circulated briefly before removal. Jake's channel went inactive. The incident was incorporated into park safety briefings as an example of how terrain, weather, and momentum leave no margin for correction once a commitment is made. It was October 22, 2014. The South Kaibab Trail near Cedar Ridge was clear and dry that morning, and mule trains were moving on schedule. Rangers had already passed hikers, with the same reminder about standing still against the uphill wall. The rule existed for a reason. Among them was Sandra Bishop, 61, descending with 3 women from her hiking club. She had retired after 28 years as an elementary school librarian and prided herself on planning hikes carefully, often tracking routes and distances in advance. She had completed Bright Angel twice and trained for months with a weighted pack, which made her comfortable moving close to the trail's edge and around mule traffic. Sandra also had a habit of photographing working animals at close range. Her albums were filled with tight-framed shots of draft horses, ranch cattle, and sled dogs, and she often stepped closer than others to capture detail. That morning, she carried a compact point-and-shoot camera looped around her wrist, hoping to add canyon mules to her collection. Even after rangers repeated the uphill wall rule along the trail, she focused more on finding the right angle than keeping distance. By 9:40 a.m., the group reached Cedar Ridge. The trail narrowed to roughly 4 feet, bordered by a low stone lip on the outer edge and a steep drop beyond it. A string of 12 mules began climbing toward them, led by a wrangler guiding the string uphill. He gave the standard call to move uphill and remain still. Sandra and her companions stepped to the wall and waited. The animals passed one by one, panniers balanced, hooves steady against the packed dirt. The wrangler maintained spacing and watched the hikers as the line moved through. When the final mule cleared Sandra's position, the string appeared to have passed. The wrangler had already shifted his attention forward, guiding the lead animals around a bend in the trail. In that short gap, Sandra stepped away from the wall. One of her companions called her name, but Sandra raised a hand in a small dismissive gesture and moved toward the rear of the last mule. She lifted her camera and closed the distance, positioning herself only a few feet behind the animal's hindquarters. The mule reacted instantly. Both rear legs snapped backward in a rapid double kick, hooves striking Sandra in the center of her chest and upper abdomen. Witnesses heard a heavy impact. The force drove her backward, lifting her feet off the ground and carrying her over the low stone lip at the trail's edge. She fell approximately 40 feet down a sloped talus face, striking rock before coming to rest on her back. Her body lay angled against the stones, one arm trapped beneath her torso. She made no movement. Her camera landed several feet uphill, the wrist strap torn free. The moment had been recorded twice, once in a photo just before the kick and once during the fall as the camera fired unintentionally. Emergency services were contacted immediately and the mule string was secured. National Park Service medics arrived by helicopter and hiked down with equipment. Sandra was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner documented paired hoof-shaped bruises across her chest and upper abdomen. Her sternum and multiple ribs were fractured. The fall caused a severe fracture at the upper spine, where the neck meets the chest, damaging the spinal cord. There was extensive internal bleeding within the chest cavity and significant head trauma from striking rock. The cause of death was determined to be fatal spinal injury and blunt chest trauma following a mule kick that forced her off the trail. The manner of death was ruled accidental. Rangers documented the incident as a reminder for hikers to remain against the uphill wall and avoid approaching mule traffic under any circumstances. It was June 17, 2016. In Lamar Valley's thermal runoff zone, the morning felt routine. Light steam drifted off pale ground as cars slowed for wildlife. Phones came up for photos. Nothing seemed urgent, and no one expected an ordinary recording to document a death unfolding too fast to stop. Gina Williams was 28 and worked as a veterinary technician in Idaho Falls. Her job involved assisting with large animals during exams and procedures, watching behavior during restraint, and helping treat injuries that required calm hands. Co-workers described her as confident and careful, someone used to working close to animals when situations felt controlled and predictable. Outside of work, Gina recorded wildlife encounters several mornings each week. Her audience was small but steady, mostly repeat viewers who followed her style. She had informal promotional ties with a phone stabilizer brand and a small outdoor clothing company that occasionally reshared her clips. Views usually increased when she stood closer than the park guidance advised. That morning, she pulled into a roadside turnout to record a bull bison near a mineral-crusted thermal runoff pool fed by nearby hot springs. The ground looked firm in spots, but thinned toward the edge, where heat and steam kept it damp. Wind shifted in short bursts, pushing steam low. The bull grazed several yards away, lifting its head as it closed the distance. Later review of the phone recording showed a clear change in the bull's behavior. The animal shifted from grazing to a broadside stance and stepped several feet closer before stopping. Its head lowered slightly, and it scraped the ground once with a forehoof, breaking loose dirt and mineral crust. The runoff pool sat directly behind her, its edge uneven and thin, with hot water flowing just beneath the surface. The bull moved abruptly. Its first contact came as a forceful shove, driven by its shoulder and head, not a full charge. The impact struck Gina across the hip and upper leg, lifting her briefly and pushing her sideways. She fell hard onto uneven ground, several feet from where she had been standing. As she tried to regain her footing, the bull pivoted and advanced again. The second contact came moments later. Its head and chest struck her squarely, pushing her backward toward the runoff pool. The mineral crust beneath her heels fractured as her weight shifted, offering no support. The ground collapsed without resistance, and Jana fell backward into the runoff pool, entering legs first as steam erupted from water near 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The bull stepped forward once, then turned away and moved off, leaving only boiling water and rising vapor that quickly obscured the pool from view. What followed allowed no chance for rescue. Contact with the water caused immediate and catastrophic thermal injury, with heat severe enough to destroy skin and underlying tissue within seconds. The unstable ground and steam made it unsafe for anyone nearby to approach. Emergency services were contacted immediately by witnesses familiar with the area. Rangers arrived within minutes, but could not enter the runoff zone due to extreme temperatures and the risk of further collapse. The phone was later recovered from mineral crust near the pool after water flow shifted, confirming the sequence of impacts and the timing of the fall. The coroner ruled the death an extensive thermal injury, with full-thickness burns over more than 90% of the body. Superheated water and steam caused rapid organ failure, and consciousness would have lasted only seconds, with death occurring in under half a minute. Injuries matched sudden immersion after a single blunt force impact, consistent with witness accounts and site conditions. In the weeks that followed, her promotional partners quietly withdrew. Park officials installed additional fencing around the runoff area and revised safety briefings to address how animal movement, unstable ground, and recording behavior can combine without warning. It was September 9th, 2018, along the Colorado River deep inside the Grand Canyon in northern Arizona. Late summer temperatures hovered in the upper 80s as rafting groups moved steadily through the canyon corridor toward one of the river's most dangerous rapids. One of the most powerful rapids on this stretch of river is Lava Falls Rapid at River Mile 179. Formed by debris from an ancient lava flow that partially blocked the river, the rapid creates towering standing waves and violent hydraulics capable of pulling swimmers beneath the surface. Among the passengers traveling through the canyon that day was 36-year-old Ruby Grunt. She had joined several friends on a multi-day rafting trip organized by a small, private outfitter. Ruby worked in the service industry and had little experience with whitewater rafting, but she often described herself as a confident swimmer and had spent much of the earlier trip moving freely around the raft while the group passed through smaller rapids. Before reaching Lava Falls, the river guide brought the rafts to shore along a gravel bar downstream from the rapid to review safety procedures. Passengers were instructed to tighten their life jackets, secure their helmets, and remain seated as the rafts entered the main hydraulic waves. Witnesses later stated that most passengers checked their gear carefully before returning to the water. Ruby removed her life jacket before the rafts pushed back into the current. Several passengers later recalled noticing she was no longer wearing it as the raft began drifting toward the entrance channel, where the current accelerated toward the rapid. Within minutes, the rafts were approaching Lava Falls. As the raft entered the rapid, the river dropped sharply over submerged rock ledges, forming powerful standing waves across the channel. The boat rose and dipped as it crossed the first set of waves, the current pushing the raft deeper into the turbulent water. Near the center of the rapid, a larger standing wave struck the side of the raft and lifted the bow upward. Witnesses reported that Ruby lost her balance as the boat tilted and was thrown over the side into the fast-moving river. The water inside the rapid churned violently around a powerful hydraulic, where collapsing waves forced swimmers back beneath the surface. Without a life jacket to keep her afloat, Ruby struggled to stay above the turbulent current as the river pushed her toward the recirculating water below the wave. Passengers in the raft reported seeing her surface briefly before being pulled back beneath the churning water. The current carried the raft farther downstream before the crew could maneuver back upstream, leaving Ruby trapped in the hydraulic zone where the river repeatedly folded back on itself. After several moments, her body drifted out of the turbulent water and into a calmer stretch below the rapid. Witnesses reported she was no longer moving. The rafting crew steered their boats toward the calmer channel and pulled Ruby from the water onto a gravel shoreline below the rapid. Passengers assisted the guide as they attempted resuscitation while waiting for help further downstream. Rangers later met the rafting party at a common river stop used by rafting groups traveling through the canyon. Investigators collected witness statements and examined the safety equipment carried by the group. According to the official incident report, Ruby had not been wearing a life jacket when the raft entered Lava Falls Rapid. Without flotation support, the powerful current quickly forced her beneath the surface after she fell into the hydraulic. Medical findings later confirmed that Ruby Grant died from drowning during the rafting incident at Lava Falls Rapid. Investigators concluded that the absence of a life jacket played a critical role in preventing her from remaining afloat in the turbulent water, an avoidable decision that turned a routine passage through one of the canyon's most dangerous rapids into a fatal accident. It was September 10, 2015, near Tower Falls. A photography workshop gathered along a narrow forest trail as wind moved through standing dead trees under otherwise routine conditions. Robert Stevens, known to most as Bob, was 45 and had spent over a decade photographing decay in protected landscapes. He worked seasonally as a contracted guide, filing permits through the National Park Service and advertising workshops on outdoor photography forums. His income came from modest sponsorships with camera retailers and licensing agreements with conservation magazines that favored stark, unsettling imagery. Bob was quiet and deliberate. He cared more about order than attention, spending his time documenting fallen trees, erosion, and the gradual decay of abandoned natural features. Students described his teaching style as patient and deliberate. He encouraged close positioning for composition and believed careful framing mattered more than distance. He carried 2 DSLR cameras, a carbon fiber tripod, spare batteries, and weather covers. The workshop that morning focused on standing dead trees, especially lodgepole pines weakened by beetle infestation. Bob selected a narrow forest corridor near Tower Falls, where several dead trunks leaned at shallow angles. A wind advisory had been issued overnight. On arrival, conditions appeared stable enough to proceed. The group discussed risk briefly and chose to continue. Before the demonstration began, several participants recorded short clips of Bob explaining composition choices and environmental context. Cameras were lowered once positioning started. The corridor was quiet, except for wind moving through the canopy. Bob stood several feet ahead of the group, adjusting angles and explaining how dead trees illustrated impermanence within protected landscapes. As the morning progressed, wind gusts increased in frequency. Needles and small branches fell intermittently onto the trail. A few students raised concerns and suggested moving to a more open area. Bob paused, looked down the corridor, and decided to continue with a shortened demonstration rather than relocate entirely. He stepped closer to a dead pine to show how proximity changed perspective and scale. The trunk showed surface cracking and a hollowed base, features Bob had previously identified during the walk. Wind noise rose briefly, then dropped. The group remained stationary, listening, with cameras no longer in use. The failure occurred without prolonged warning. A sharp crack cut through the corridor as the dead pine sheared partway up its trunk. The sound drew immediate attention, but there was no time to react. The tree fell diagonally across the narrow trail. Bob was struck across the abdomen and lower chest. The force drove him downward and pinned him to the ground. His body folded forward beneath the weight. Movement stopped immediately. The tree settled with part of the trunk resting across his torso and one shoulder. Emergency services were contacted immediately by workshop participants. Rangers arrived within minutes, followed by medical personnel. Bob showed no signs of consciousness or breathing when responders reached him. Due to the weight and position of the tree, there were no survivable injuries. The area was secured and the workshop was dismissed. The coroner later described the cause of death in plain terms. The falling tree crushed the chest and abdomen, destroying internal organs and rupturing major blood vessels. Death occurred at the moment of impact. There was no evidence of prolonged suffering or secondary injury. Investigators reviewed footage recorded earlier during the workshop to establish positioning and environmental conditions before the incident. No recording captured the moment of impact. Equipment was examined and found functional. Weather conditions were documented and determined to be within existing advisory thresholds. The death was ruled accidental, caused by gusting wind and proximity to unstable dead trees. Workshop guidelines and permit requirements were later revised. Bob's remaining sessions were canceled, and his unfinished work was archived and restricted to internal safety training.